Welcome everyone to IFS Down Under, where we have deep conversations with leaders in the IFS space and share the stories and wisdom of Australian IFS therapists. I'm your host, Oliver Brook, and I'm here today with my co-host, Lorani Lees. Lorani is a clinical psychologist, certified IFS therapist, and certified IFS clinical consultant. This year, Lorani became Australia's second ever trainer in training for the IFS Institute, joining Emma Diamond, who recently became Australia's first ever co-lead trainer. Welcome, Lorani. It's really great having you hosting IFS Down Under with me.
Thank you, Ollie. Welcome, Cece. I'm so glad to be here. And yes, it is my first time and very much looking forward to it. So thank you.
Great to have you. Before I introduce you, Cece, it's tradition in Australia to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're presenting, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and all First Nations people across Australia and North America. We pay our deepest respect to all their elders and healers, past, present, and emerging, and welcome all First Nations people to be a part of this conversation and hold a hope for healing for us all. So today, Lorani and I have the pleasure of interviewing you, Cece. And I'm just going to say a bit of a bio, and then we'll get into exploring some of your teachings and things that you're wanting to share with us. So Cece Sykes is a senior lead trainer for the IFS Institute. She's led level 1, 2, and 3 trainings for the IFSI for the last 2 decades. Cece has held space for and treated human suffering for over 4 decades. She saw her first client, a 13-year-old sexually abused runaway foster child, at a community-based family services agency in 1978. As well before I was born, Cece. So, yeah.
Thanks for reminding me, Ollie. Go ahead.
Initially trained as a structural strategic family therapist, Cece you started your private practice in 1992, and you expanded your clinical focus to include the internal family systems model in the late 1990s. From what I know, you knew Dick a lot earlier than that, though, but we'll ask you about that in a moment.
Okay, great. Yeah.
And you first contributed to a chapter on IFS to treating addictive processes called An IFS Lens on Addiction, Compassion for Extreme Parts in the 2016 book, Innovations and Elaborations in IFS Therapy. And then in 2023, your book was published, Internal Family Systems Therapy for Addictions, which you authored with Martha Sweezy and the founder of IFS, Richard Schwartz. And this was about using the IFS model to understand and treat addictive processes. Another component of your work has been the intersection of psychotherapy and spirituality. And you've worked with a wide range of spiritual practices, from Zen communities to groups with traditional religious beliefs, also 12-step followers on how to fold their vision of the inner spirit into the practice of psychotherapy. So after decades spent in this field, you've developed an interest in the impact of psychotherapy upon the life story of the clinician. And I was looking into you creating and leading the heart lessons of the journey workshops, exploring the personal narratives of psychotherapists across the globe. And more recently, and very luckily for Lorani and I, you hosted the first ever IFS Level 2 on addictive processes for the Australian IFS community in an Australian time zone. And Lorani assisted you, Cece, in the training, and I was lucky enough to be one of the participants. And it was such an incredible deep dive into using IFS to work with addictive processes in client systems. I'm still noticing small things and large things of how that training has landed for me in my work with my clients. Yeah. And I was very lucky to have a moment with you in one of the demos where I was your client. So it was a very touching training. So we're really, really happy to have you here with us today, Cece. And yeah, welcome to IFS Down Under. And thanks so much for agreeing to be here with us and to have this conversation.
Thank you both for inviting me. And I had a wonderful experience with you guys. And Lorani was the lead PA for that training, and it was just a really wonderful experience. So I'm happy to be back with your crowd.
Right.
Yeah, we welcome you back anytime, Cece. Yeah, thank you. So Cece, I thought I would share with you and our viewers that intention for today, for this interview.
Yeah.
And just to share, just to give you an opportunity to share with us your teachings on IFS and particularly addictive processes, and within the Australian audience as well. And particularly for those who weren't lucky enough to be able to attend your training, there were so many interests. When Simon put out the registration for your level 2, you were, a magnet, but unfortunately we only had a selected number. So this is really the intention to allow some space for those who couldn't attend to hear your voice and to really allow you to share with them some of the gems that you shared with us in our level 2 training. So.
Oh, that's nice. That's wonderful. Sounds good.
Yeah.
I know sometimes you hate to say no, you hate to have any boundaries, but we have to have them.
Yeah. So before, so I asked you the first question. So before we ask you about your compassionate approach to treating addictive processes and your recent book that Ollie just mentioned, we thought it would be meaningful for listeners to hear the beginning of your IFS journey. So, Cece, if you can just tell us about the origin of your IFS journey and how you became an IFS therapist and your own personal healing throughout the years.
Yeah, well, as you've already mentioned, my journey as a therapist is a long one. But actually it was early on that I did meet Dick Schwartz, because his, PhD is in family systems. This is how I was trained. So the family therapy community in the Chicago area, which is where we're all from, sort of knew each other and got together and so forth. So he taught at the Institute for Juvenile Research and then later at Northwestern. But when he was at Institute for Juvenile Research, I was at sort of a cousin agency that was connected to the university, but the head of our agency used to head that agency. So there was a lot of back and forth. And so one day we hear Dick has a new idea. Dick Schwartz. And so we drive downtown to hear Dick's new idea. And we go and we think he's going to be, we know he's doing some research with disordered eating, and, we don't know what we'll hear. And instead, he stands in front of a blackboard, to remember those, with the kind with chalk. He's got a pie chart behind him, sectioned off. And he starts talking about how he was working with his clients and he's been doing family therapy, and that's what everybody's taught to do, but it was only going so far. And out of a certain level of frustration, he sort of started applying family therapy techniques, really, in a certain way, with asking the client, well, okay, why don't you just talk to that one who likes to binge? Okay, wait, no, there's another one there that's criticizing that one. Okay, tell that one to step back. Like you might, if you were in a family dyad and you wanted mom and daughter to speak and you wanted dad to step out, dad, you step back, let mom and daughter, because in family therapy, there's all this mixed up boundaries. Anyway, so people started paying attention to different parts of themselves. They used the word parts themselves. That's where he got the word from, was from the clients. And he's telling us all this. And he said after they, do this work, they sort of feel like they're more of themselves there, when he came up with his self idea. So it sounded really fascinating, but this is so opposite of family therapy, where you hardly even work with the individual in a certain way. I mean, you say change the system and you change the symptom. So meaning if the child is a symptom bearer, mom says A and dad says B in a traditional sort of hetero family, what does child do? C, whatever they want. You know, so you get mom and dad to work together. So here we are listening to all this and going, what? And I thought it was interesting, but at the time I thought it seems too complicated to me. And it was very, very new. It was very fresh. And later I had a friend who was his client, was Dick's client. And so I would ask her, you know, as a sort of a therapist, I said, so what's going on? She goes, I don't know, he just has a lot of little me's standing at the gate, at the fence outside my yard or something like that. You know, Dick was experimenting with all this. So while I was fascinated with it, there was also someone in my staff who did stay with it in consultation groups with him. But I was doing a lot of work with sexual abuse survivors. I loved my work. I loved what I was learning. I loved what we were doing. We were doing individual and family and groups. And so that was really where my love was. And but there was someone on our staff who, when she talked about personally about the model, made me crazy. Like at a staff meeting, you know, a part of me this and a part of me that. And I thought, oh my God, make up your mind. But she was doing some really beautiful work with her clients that I really liked. So I'm making this story very long. Many years later, so this is maybe the early 80s when all of this happened. So we're, you know, and I always would listen to things that Dick would say, you know, if I'd hear him at a conference or something, or read what he wrote in the Networker. And I would kind of argue with it sometimes. I don't know if I agree with the article. Anyway, I went to see him in 98. I know because that's when the training was. And I thought, oh, I like the model a lot more now. And but what also had happened in between there is that in my own personal life, I had gone through a bunch of crises, a crisis in my marriage, which related to addictive processes, you know, crises with my mom and, you know, of my parents and my codependency with my mom. I was sort of facing into this in all the parts of my life. So I think I was more prepared, really, to be able to be with my vulnerability. You know, family systems is a little bit less, you know, involved with our vulnerability in a certain way. So anyway, I took the training and I got immediately involved and never have left. So
That's so good.
a long story, I guess, but
yeah, but just following from that, Cece, I mean, because you know your journey has been so long, so reflecting back on that whole journey, what was the most important thing a teacher? And what I mean by a teacher could be a mentor, could be Dick, could be a client, it could be someone. What was the most important thing a teacher has ever said to you as you reflect on that?
wow. On all of that, well, there were some women, there's two, I'll give you two examples. There were some women in Boston. They were feminist family therapists or feminist therapists. I don't know, they weren't all family therapists. Anyway, they would write about the therapeutic relationship. And they were differentiating themselves from the more male-oriented family therapy, which was very patriarchal in a certain way, and valuing men differently than women in a certain way. So they had this very alternative view. And they wrote about the not having such a hierarchy between the client and the therapist. And they gave this story about this woman who called before appointment and was just feeling really vulnerable and just thinking about not how to help this person clinically so much as just thinking about her humanity. When she called kind of desperate, you know, like, I know I have an appointment Thursday, but I just need to talk to you today just for a couple of minutes. That kind of a call came in. And I found it so refreshing and so heartwarming. It was so much about the person, you know, person first, they say in certain ways. Before a model, before interventions, it was about her and her humanity. And that really stuck with me a long time. It's still with me, I think. You know, just are we, you know, not this idea of luckily we have the answers and they're coming to us for answers, but more of that shared humanity as a way to think about the clinical relationship. So maybe I think that had a huge impact on me. It's still in there all the time, really, when I think about my work. And in terms of IFS, when I first was in the training, in the level 1 training, and I heard Dick talk about firefighters and how firefighters have a positive intention behind the negative behavior. And I think, as I told you guys in my level 2, I just can look at the family tree. It's not all in my immediate family, my family of origin, but I don't have to go too far out. We cover all the firefighters, you know, drugs, alcohol, gambling, suicide, sexual abuse, incest. It's all in there in my family, extended family. So, you know, this idea about what's behind this behavior and what happens when you love people who also have destructive, harmful behaviors. Well, how does that work, you know? So this model and this idea of the positive intentions behind what we would call negative or self-harming or risky behaviors, really, I mean, I just kind of wept when I heard that. I thought, oh, okay. So that made sense to me. So that too, I thought was just powerful. And again, also very much, you know, very much about, it's not resilience, but just really looking at the humanity of someone rather than just the symptoms.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Cece. Thanks for sharing those two experiences that you had. It really shines through in your writings and in your work that you see people in that way. Yeah, first, that there's not this hierarchy between you and your client, that you see their humanity, that you connect with in that way. And second, and what stood out for me so much in the level 2, yeah, is really seeing people's firefighters or substance use or whatever way you want to name it, in this really, helpful way of really knowing their good intention, that they're doing something for this person. And yeah, that's interesting that stood out for you so early on in that first training with Dick, because it seems to have stuck with you from what I can see in your teachings and in your book.
Well, life being complicated and us all having parts in a system, I can't say that every time I was confronted with a firefighter and someone I loved, that I was open-hearted and welcoming. I was not. So how the managers fit into that picture is also very instructive to me.
Yeah.
But yes, at the core, that is what I'm holding.
Yeah,
but it's the other pieces of it too, right? It's the other pieces of it too. It's our reactivity, our fears, you know, our hopelessness, you know, our little hopeless exiles, you know, so that fits in there too. And that's also part of my journey, personally and professionally, with my clients. So, you know, to just face into what comes up for me around, you know, when I cannot control the people I love.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, that's part of it. But I like this model because it allows us not just to work. It has an idea about the behaviors, the symptomatic, the acting out sort of behaviors, but it also helps us work with the parts of us that are trying to do right or get it right, but are so stuck also.
Yeah. And Cece, I just want to thank you for your book. I've got it here with me, so I'll just show it to people.
Wonderful, Ali.
Internal Family Systems Therapy for Addictions. It's a fantastic resource for anyone, any of our listeners wanting to understand IFS, working with addictive processes and addictive systems in a deeper way. And you've already sort of mentioned firefighters, and we've started this conversation around addictive processes already. So I just want to deepen that a bit more, if that's okay. And in the first few pages of the book, it talks about how there's these kind of common beliefs out in society around believing that addiction is a disease, or that people who are addicted kind of lack willpower. They just aren't able to stop because they don't have enough willpower. And I just wonder if you could kind of speak to that view and then offer your alternative view of what addiction means to you from your IFS framework and your learnings.
Well, I think that the efforts to call, and in this case, this was more around substances. And I like to think about, food issues, gambling issues, sexual preoccupations, all of them as being addictive processes. So I don't want to center on just one of those. But anyway, the whole brain disease piece initially was developed to sort of counteract the idea that people who had drinking and drug issues were morally, bereft, lacking in morals and so forth. And so to get away from the moralistic view, they tried to do a more medical view, a more biological view. Well, it's a brain disease. And absolutely, the brain is impacted by repetitive behaviors of any kind. And certainly it's impacted by using substances and actually any other kind of practices that activate our reward system. It sets up, as Patrick Carnes said, a 6-lane highway to the reward center. We get there fast. And that's a setup. So I don't want to say the brain is not impacted, but as I like to say, how does knowing that help me or my client? And what does that say about the rest of the person? Again, if we try to think about, I'm not treating a symptom like I drink and drug, I'm treating a person. What does that tell me about the rest of the person? They have a brain disease, not much. So I think it doesn't help clinically. And I've had many people, some people find some sort of solace in the idea of a brain disease, and they feel it like kind of lets them off the hook in a good way, like it helps their critics calm down. They say, well, it's a brain disease and that's why I got stuck. So for some people that actually lands and they feel okay with that. I would never take that away from them. If that's what they feel is true for them, then I'm going to stay with that. But at the same time, other people can feel hopeless around that. And like, why should I even try if my brain is diseased? So what I say to my clients and the way I like to think about it is that, okay, parts of your brain have absolutely been impacted, but what about the part of your brain that's just sitting here talking to me? What about that? What about all the other things that you do? You go to work, you raise your kids, you do this, you finish school. So what we're going to do is work with all of with as much other parts of your brain to connect to the parts of the brain that have gotten stuck. So I think it just gives us a little more hope, and it gives us and our clients in particular more agency around empowering themselves about what they can do. And willpower, that sort of relates to the moralism, and also it relates to everything related to food. So often, people diets, and we could talk all day about all the parts all of us have learned from a very young age about what we're supposed to eat and not supposed to eat, and how we're supposed to look, and body shame. And actually, Dick's wife, Jean Catanzaro, has a new book out, which I think is going to be really, really good. It's coming out in September, on our relationship with our body and with food, which is IFS based. So, we still think anyone who has does anything that's out of control, there is this sense that perhaps they actually just lack character, or they need to just straighten up. There's that sense that I think exists out there. And we might all hope that, because they sort of look chaotic and they sort of look like they're not maybe trying hard enough in certain kinds of ways. But I really like the reframe that we use in IFS, which is those parts are trying to solve a problem, and they sort of trying to solve it a long time ago in a lot of different ways, and now they are the problem. But there are other problems that have developed along the way too, the negative self-contempt and negative self-talk.
Yeah.
So I hope, does that kind of respond to your
Yeah, definitely. No, that's a really, really great answer. Thank you. And it makes me think of that kind of common reframe in the addiction space around, so instead of saying what's wrong with you, we ask kind of what happened to you. And I wonder if you could kind of speak more to that around how trauma and adverse childhood experiences kind of lead to these addictive processes or contribute to them in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think Gabor Mate has done such a beautiful job for a number of years now with his first book, Hungry Ghost, or her first book around addictive stuff, to ask that question, to turn that question around and to connect trauma and addiction. And to say, as he says, not why the addiction, but why the pain. I think that's one of the ways, you know, as you say, just said, Ali.
Yeah.
So I love that he has done it, and he's done a great job globally, and he's really been a missionary with a mission to connect trauma to addictive processes. And I think IFS has a similar sort of paradigm shift. You know, we asked not why are you doing this to yourself, but how is that part of you trying to help you? Or, you know, not why are you so checked out? Why do you have to leave all the time, or you're so checked out? But what are you afraid would happen if you were here? If you were here in this with us, or here in this world more? So it's that similar paradigm shift that is asking how that part engaged in that behavior or behaviors is trying to help. And in IFS, we have such a great way to say, what are you afraid will happen if you don't do this? We have these sort of protocols for helping people understand what's behind the using, what's behind the protectors. I'll feel lonely, I'll fall apart, I'll collapse, there'll be too much emotional pain, I'll have too many memories. That gives us so much good information as clinicians. So, and it gives people hope, because they say, well, if there's another way to deal with that original issue, you know, the central issue, the early issues, if we have another way to deal with them, will that give you some ease? You know, we can ask protectors. So they don't always believe us the first time. Who would? But gradually, when we build these relationships, the therapist with the client and the client with their own parts, the parts start to trust that there is another way, you know, through compassion and through attunement, when we attune to our parts.
Yeah, just listening to you, Cece, and that's such a central theme that comes through. Just listen to you now, and even as you know, reading the books and the writings that you have and the teachings that you have been able to provide over the years. The central emphasis of, you know, what you mentioned about the humanity, seeing the humanity in the person, but the compassion that oozes out of what you just said then and through your writing. It says, can you share with us why you feel that component of compassion is so important in working in this field, particularly for those with addiction and even for us therapists? What?
Well, I guess we all need it, even if we're not addicted to anything right this minute. So I guess it's just, but why we would emphasize it is to sort of counteract the stigma and the bias that the person themselves is a problem, right? To counteract shame, to counteract worthlessness. And I guess to just also, but it's such a good question. Why isn't compassion important? I mean, it just sounds like almost in a sense, it's almost a spiritual answer. Like, why is compassion important to living, you know? But I guess it's maybe the center of any spiritual teaching. Really, we're always trying to help ourselves have more compassion for ourselves. So the spiritual traditions emphasize it, you know, and so psychotherapy, I think, is beginning in you know, IFS and other models as well, but just centering the approach around compassion. I think, I think we just need it. I guess you could also say, do we deserve it? Or another way to ask the question might be, what creates change? I think about that a lot. Like, what creates change? Like, what's the setting? What's the setting for creating change? And so, I think compassion has a lot to do with it, and attunement and presence and showing up and acceptance. And this isn't original with me. I think Carl Rogers was the original one who said, when I accept myself as I am, then I find out it's easier for me to change. Something like that. I'm not quoting it exactly right. And that was maybe about 50 years ago. I think it was the 70s, maybe late 60s. So compassion is one of the 8 C's in IFS, and IFS, of course, how do we define what self is, or the centered place, or that center in us? Compassion being one of those C's. I guess I just come back to the fact that I think we all flourish, really, and can flourish, when we have an open heart to ourselves, and, with each other.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. When you were just talking before around some of the underlying stuff that happens that lead to these addictive processes or contribute to them. I remember when my mum got really sick when I was a teenager. She got diagnosed with breast cancer and had to have a few kind of serious surgeries and chemotherapy and things. And she was suddenly kind of unavailable to me for all of those reasons, emotionally, physically. And a part of me just lent into video games, and I just would play so many of them during that period for many years while she was sick. She eventually did die, but during the time when she was sick, I played so many video games. And at the same time, I had such criticism of myself for doing that, because I was also then unavailable, because I was taking myself away. And when you just spoke to the compassion there, and I remember it in your training too, Cece, it's so de-shaming to go, oh, it's okay, Ollie. Like, I did that because my mum was so ill and I was feeling so much pain and grief, and I needed something to soothe myself. And now I can I didn't have it at the time. I didn't have the awareness at the time. I just had this kind of inner conflict around a bit of shame and criticism and doing this behavior a lot. But now I can see with compassion that had an intention for me, that it was trying to soothe, that it was trying to cope with that massive experience. So I just wanted to add that. That's what came up for me when you were answering Lorani's question around compassion, that it can really shift how we see ourselves and how we see these processes that happen, whether it's with substances or gaming or whatever it might be.
I mean, that's such a perfect example. And first, I'm just so sorry you lost your mom at a young age. That's really tough. And I love that you can make space for that young teenager who's confused and bereft, and grieve, that act of grieving during illness and fear and confusion. So I love that you can have compassion for him, and that he found a way through. And I love that you're also noticing how you were so hard on yourself. Like in an IFS language, the managers were so tough on those firefighters that were trying to give you some relief. And so what happens when we can be compassionate to the guy who needed to escape in games, but also to the part that wanted you to be a good son and show up or do the right thing, or do good in school to show your mom you're doing a good job. you know, all of those parts too deserve that compassion, you know? And I do love IFS for helping us look at our psyche or the aspects of our functioning, you know, in a way where we can separate them out and understand these different operations. And
Yeah.
think of all the parts that need our compassion. There's a lot of them.
Yeah. And could you speak to that more, Cece, around that polarity? I think you named it in your book, the addictive polarity between the manager and the firefighter. And then that really helpful kind of practical visual way of seeing it, you know, with the triangle, the blame, flame, and shame triangle. Yeah, could you speak to those?
Yeah, you know, I was teaching one time, and I don't remember exactly when, and I was trying to teach polarities. And so the old family systems person in me put a triangle up on a flip chart, you know, and said, okay, we're going to put the managers here. We're going to put the firefighters here. You know, these are the parts they're embattled, and then they're protecting who's underneath. And it made so much sense to me. And I'm like, I was looking around and I was like, yeah, okay. And I thought, all right, we're on it. This is good. And the sense, though, that there is this battle, and to me, that's the crux of an addictive process. If you do something and there's absolutely no backlash, no remorse, no regret, no reaction to it, there's no addiction. You have to have both. They both feed each other. The using feeds the part that wants to control it and do better. And the part that wants to control it and do better, the harsher it gets. The more we have parts that need to get away, because the only ones listening to all that harshness are the exiles, our most vulnerable parts. Firefighters listen for a while and they placate. All right, fine, I'll be good for a couple of days. But it keeps raining in on the exiles. So this imagery of how that works within us, the triangle works perfectly for it. And I think that it's that cycle that is so, you know, repetitive. And, you know, that can happen for some people a couple times a day, and for some people a couple times a week. But this sense of you know, having some sort of, you know, feeling lonely, feeling anxious, reaching out, doing the thing. And then the thing is over. And then there's a quick moment of shame, which we hardly even notice. And then we either get good again and be like, okay, all right, back on track, go back to work, you know, put all that away, and or we go back to using again because of the pain, depending upon the person or the situation. So I've never spoken about that process to anyone who has suffered with using and had them not nod their head and go, all right. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story. I was trying to I had to videotape what I'm telling you. You know, I had to videotape the model, teaching for the model at this place, and I didn't know anyone, and there's just two guys in the room filming me, and I'm so at the end of doing my whole thing and describing the triangle and the cycle and everything, I was so needy of feedback, you know. And by the way, I'm in Denver, Colorado. These guys have ponytails and it's all, you know. And so I finished my whole thing and I'm so needy of feedback. I go, okay, you guys, you know, this thing I just put up there, you know, like, what do you think? You know, does that make sense to you? And they come out from behind the camera and they're like a little pale. They go, oh yeah, we were there this morning. Like, all right, you got it. Like, oh, we got it. Yeah, we got it. Yeah. You know? So, you know, and that's so energizing to me to find a way for people to sort of understand their own patterns. What could have more of a pattern than something we repeatedly do? You know, where, you know, so when and then lonely, you know, lonely, use, try to get better, shame, you know, to see our patterns is it's empowering.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? You know, we have a little bit of a plan.
I'll just say, I'll jump in. I'm now drawing those upside down triangles in all my client notes, so it's stuck with me, Cece. So thank you.
All right, I'm so glad. Me too. That's how I've taken notes for a long time. It's simple, right? Doop, doop, doop. This is what we did today.
Yeah.
Or just this one, you know.
Yeah, me too. I draw that triangle every time as well, Cece. But you know what? The most amazing thing that I've learned from you is that not just the client's triangle, but my triangle. So one of the most difficult dynamic I'm starting to really see is that between clients and therapists triangle. So when a client's fierce firefighters are activated, it kind of like recruits the therapist managers to come into that to interact with their triangle. So it's such an enticing invitation for therapist managers to show up to manage their client's firefighter. So Cece, can you elaborate on that dynamic and how do you navigate that when you see that happen, the interpersonal polarization between therapists and clients?
Oh, I'm so glad you're asking about that, Lorani. You know, it's really, you know, the one, again, something that I respect about IFS and the way we all participate in the trainings together, right? Is it experiential? It's working with our own parts as clinician is a huge part of the training. In fact, some people come to level 1 and they're like, what? You know, I can't believe that it's so demanding of us, right? To look at ourselves. So I do really appreciate that value because a clinical relationship is such an intimate relationship. I mean, the clinician, the therapist is not getting their intimate needs met, but there is a lot of just powerful vulnerability that's shared and that's exposed. And you talk about the power, maybe I'm coming back to that power differential thing, you know, it's so easy to when we're feeling vulnerable to want to step up into some kind of power over or you know, distance in some kind of way when we're feeling vulnerable, and we have that opportunity, right, because we're the expert in the room. So it lends itself to taking that position. And also sometimes our clients have parts that are like, what should I do? You know, they have parts that would, you know, love to have someone guide them in certain ways. But what I love about this model is, what I really believe in is when someone's in a firefighter, you know, and I think it's someone who knows physics knows, I think it's centrifugal force, you know, that twirling around of their system just draws in the energy of everything around it, you know. And I think it takes more energy to stay out of a chaotic person's life than to jump into it. You know, the idea of wanting to jump in and grab people by the collar and go, okay, now listen to me a minute. You know, that urge is almost inescapable. So I want to just be affectionate with that urge on all of our parts to jump in. Their life is unmanageable, as the 12 steps say. And so it invites someone to take charge of that. But when we can lasso our own managers and pull them back a little bit, what we have the opportunity to do is help the client find their own managers, even if it's, you know, a very small charge, a small energy in this moment. But the more we manage, the less they need to manage themselves. You know, that's that systemic energetic thing. If I'm going to take charge, I'm going to lean in, I'm going to lean out. The other, you know. So I really think when someone's struggling and suffering in this way, even if they have parts that both reject help and advice and parts that maybe seek it, I like this model for just saying, staying out of that. And that doesn't mean we don't have the parts. It doesn't mean we don't want to manage them. But it does mean, sometimes it means you just speak for that. I have a part of me that's getting kind of activated. I'm getting kind of worried, or I feel like the stakes are getting higher here. And I want to speak for that. And maybe we could have a conversation about that. When I say that to you, how does that land on you, right? So inviting them to comment on what we're sharing. But this sense that historically, we sort of do battle with firefighters, wrestle them to the ground, if you will, you know, and I don't think that's really helpful. I think human nature, we like to have our own autonomy. Autonomy is important. So to help someone find their own balance, rebalance their own system, I got to get out of there, you know, and help them, you know, do the U-turn, as Dick said, begin to find their own system.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you speak, it reminds me of what you mentioned in one of your books and writings about when the firefighter really takes over and is so fierce, and it's the U-turn, the invitation, is there someone in there that may have a different opinion to this, or have you heard someone in there that has trying to do something different? So really inviting their manager to kind of like have a voice as well.
You got it. And when that client is complaining about my wife, my parent, my brother, my boss, my girlfriend, my boyfriend tells me, and we can start with compassion. That sounds awful. Nobody wants to be yelled at. Sounds like they only see what's wrong with me. That's actually pretty painful, and it's really hard. But have you ever said that to yourself? We won't tell them right now. But have you ever said that to yourself? I should be home more often, or I haven't. It is getting a little scary, or I am spending too much time on that. So I like the IFS allows us to invite people to notice these other parts of themselves. And if I stay in the place of saying, you know, if I want to join with that, well, I think you can understand why your boss is saying that to you, right? I mean, if you shouldn't show up to work like this, I mean, you can, I think, don't you understand why you're, you know, or I guess if you're never home, I mean, I guess that is why your partner might have some issues with you, right? You know, if we get into that manager with them, and we may feel that part sometimes, right? We may feel that energy coming up, frustration or judgment. However, how would any of us respond to that kind of a question? You know, like, well, not really. No, you know, and I want to say just separately that there are times when, you know, I'm thinking about, we just taught IFS to High Watch Treatment Center. I'll tell you about that in a minute, but it's a 12-step based treatment center. And there are times when someone comes in to a treatment center, or maybe they just come into a 12-step meeting, and they are kind of just ready to be led. They've had it. They have reached some sort of bottom, which to me is some sort of level of acceptance that they're in trouble, and acceptance that they don't know how to run their own frickin' life anymore. And they are open to just do this, come to this meeting, read this, call this person. And there isn't reactivity, and they're not feeling like they're losing autonomy. But their system is ready and open for some kind of direction. And so when people say, well, it works, some people, it really works for them. And I say, it does. It absolutely does work for people at certain points in time. And so there's no, you know, there's no problem. You know, you talk, they listen, everything's okay. What we have, where IFS is really useful, is for everybody who's not in that place, or who has parts that come up later that feel resistant and skeptical. You know, but I just want to acknowledge sometimes people are just, I'm open. I'm happy to be led for a while. And it would be temporary, but you know, the way it can work that way sometimes. But at some point, everyone wants to find their own sort of center and their own balance.
That's so helpful, Cece. Thank you for that. The other thing that has been really was touching for me and helpful, and and you can miss this easily in your writing, but I found it was so useful. If you can, in your work, Cece, you offered a very useful technique called the Mini-Unblend. Yeah, and we know about the unblending, but there's this little mini unblend that you talk throughout your work. Can you just please explain that strategy and how and when it can be used?
Yeah, I love the name of it even, you know. But so many times people come in and they're so chaotic, right? Or they're just talking. And, you know, I've been that client, you know, like I have so much to say. You know, we've all probably had that feeling. But there's sort of a pattern with our client, and we can't feel like we can't get in and we can't get any purchase. No, the rubber never hits the road. They're just sort of talking a lot, or they're just sort of chaotic, and their life just is, they're going from one story to the next, one emergency to the next. And it would kind of be like, what do I do with this? So it can be really helpful. It does take a little energy because their parts don't want to pause, but just to say, you know, I know you want to, I say it all, I've said it many times. I know there's more to tell me, and I would really like to hear all of it. But could we just pause for 1 second? I just want to take in what you're saying to me. And can we just pause together? And I know you hate when we do this, but would you be willing to take a breath with me? Yep, inhale and exhale, right? Then just pause, and then just let's just notice what's it like to talk about this with me? Or what's it like to be here? Or maybe could we just appreciate everything you've been holding all week? We just appreciate what a tough week you've been. Could we take one more breath with what a tough week it's been? So it's sort of, and then we go back, then they go back to their deluge of words, you know, but for a minute, they've paused. And I feel like it just sets up a good template. You know, when you don't know how to help someone teach the model or introduce the model, sometimes that's really helpful. And, you know, at some point, then I might sort of start adding. So when we pause, you know, and often you look at your client and they've taken a big breath in that pause, right? And you kind of notice that regulation that's happening for them. It's not, you know, they've just taken their own deeper breath. They're settling, and so how are they doing? And you can see a little unblend, right? They're getting a little bit more calm in the system. And I say, so when we pause like that, and you're feeling just, and they might say something like, okay, well, that's better. All right, yeah, no, I'm a little calmer now. And I say, okay, so that little bit of calm, that's a little bit of self-energy coming into your system. That's what that is. That's what that feels like. So it helps us not have to teach the model, but let people experience it just in this little mini way that's not so threatening. And, you know, someone who's been in chaos for a long time, they are not going to have a 20-minute inner dialogue with one of their parts. It's just too much. You know, they don't have that capacity of sitting with something in that way. They don't have a template for that in their life. So it starts this little mini example, if you will, I mean, a mini experiential for them.
Thanks for that, Cece. Yeah. I'm just thinking of a number of things that you've been talking about, and I'm just noticing that your teachings and this conversation at the moment feels like a paradigm shift for a lot of our culture in Australia, and I'm sure it's similar in the States, around how we view substance use and addictions of all sorts, whether it's eating or gambling or pornography or gaming or something else. And yeah, it's more towards this deeper understanding, more compassion, and a way of connecting with what's really going on for the person and deeply listening to them, rather than trying to tell them to stop or trying to give them a treatment plan or cut down their substance use, which I know a lot of the old interventions did in a heavy-handed kind of way. And I just wonder what you'd like to say about that, about the kind of, what it feels like is there's a culture of kind of managerial energy or managerial parts in wider systems, and that in some way they kind of shame or stigmatize people who have strong firefighters or addictive processes. And I just wonder, you know, what do you believe needs to change more widely, not just in IFS, but in the mental health kind of industry around this? Because in IFS and in your teachings, it's already happened. That paradigm shift has already been made, but I get the sense it's not being made everywhere. And I just wonder what you believe needs to change in those wider systems around this.
You know, I heard someone speak at a conference, an addictions conference some years ago, and I wish I could remember who it was. But they said that there's always been this sort of distrust between these communities, like if you want to call it the traditional psychotherapy community and the addiction treatment community or recovery community, and a little bit of a distrust between the two, in the sense that the psychotherapy community might look across the aisle and, you know, addiction recovery and say, you guys are so focused on behavior and just stopping the behavior. And, you know, there's maybe, you know, some emotions going on here too, you know. Okay. And they would look across the aisle over the psychotherapy and say, you guys have had that guy in therapy for a year. Maybe you should ask him how much he's drinking every night. It might help things out a little bit, you know. So no talk about behavior, right? Like as if it does shame someone to ask specifically about their behavior, you know. And I think that there's some truth on both sides. And I guess I feel like IFS could be something of a bridge here, which is that we do talk about behaviors, and we need to talk about specific behaviors if we want to help someone with those behaviors. And that behavior might be different kinds of practices. And those behaviors and attitudes may also be the way I talk to myself and the way I think of myself, my managers, that sort of attitudinal managers, or the way I caretake everybody. So we do talk about behavior in IFS. And at the same time, we talk about underlying trauma in IFS. And so what I would love to see is a softening of the differences between traditional psychotherapy and, you know, seeming addiction recovery, you know, there are many beautiful treatment centers out there and that do this, that do a beautiful job. So I don't mean this in a way of criticism, but it's really interesting to me that there'll be a treatment center will have a trauma center here, and then the substance use center unit over here, and the eating disorder unit here. And I've had clients say to me who had lots of substance use issues, alcohol and drug issues, say, well, they put me in the trauma unit because I don't really have, that's, you know, drugs and alcohol aren't really that much of a problem for me. I mean, it almost contributed to this sense of, you know, it's not really my issue. And at the same time, I'm not, you know, that person had a ways to go in their process, but you know, another way I think about it sometimes is, you know, I do think it's okay if someone's to work with people while they're still using. I would prefer for them not to be using immediately before they come to a session, and we might have that conversation. But let's just say they were. I mean, this is their issue. This is their symptom. I mean, if someone comes in and they're super, super panicky and they've had like extra panic attacks, or they're really, really anxious one day, we don't send them home. We don't say, you know, you're just way too anxious for me to work with you today. You just I'll come back next week, you know, or, or they have a relapse in their depression, right? They're getting better. And then they kind of have a sink and they come in and they're low and they can't talk and they don't have anything to say. And they're so flat. And you're just saying, you don't say, you know, are you taking this work seriously? You've had a relapse like this? You know, do you really, you know, want to work? You know, this isn't what we say to someone who's depressed, but this is what we say to someone who reuses, you know? So I really want us to think about that, right? And if we can soften some of the differences, we're sort of taught when a client comes in with anxiety, depression, to open our hearts to them and hear what they have to say. But someone comes with a drug and alcohol issue or eating disorders issues, what are they really going to say, and what are they not telling us the truth about? And to have some sort of skepticism. And absolutely, people can have manipulative parts, but what happens when we begin a session or we start the work from a place of skepticism and distancing and judgment? Like what parts leads to parts? as opposed to sort of open-ended, curious, listening closely to their story, respecting them, and believing that they're doing the best they can in this moment. So I would really like to just soften the difference between addiction treatment and psychotherapy. So many clinicians, I'm a trauma specialist and I'm trained in this way of working with trauma, and that way of working with trauma, and that way of working with trauma. And they get a client who comes in who's like, gaming and drinking at night, and they're like, whoa, what am I going to do here? Now what? Have you thought about a 12-step program? There's all these fears come up. So I think IFS gives us some really good tools for helping people with behaviors, parts of them with behaviors, and to build relationships with that in a way that's, effective. Sometimes they say effective compassion, right? It's very effective to help people learn their different processes and learn their patterns and get to work with underlying attachment wounds. But what happens if we don't think of these two worlds as so separate?
Yeah, it's so soothing for my system to hear you say this, to say that, Cece, because it's almost that bridge that you talk about with IFS, that it really just allow the turning towards the person exactly for who they are in that moment as they come through your door, and just be able just to be with them. They don't need to be any other way, and you are just meeting them where they at. A real sense of acceptance.
You put it perfectly, Lorani, meeting them where they're at.
Yeah.
I had a client once who came in and she had a high school, adolescence history of binging, purging, bulimic behaviors. And now she had kind of gotten through that, and now she's in her adulthood, and she was describing her life to me, and she spent every single weekend, Friday night to Sunday night, with the same group of friends, drinking and drugging. I mean, massively, just boom, 48 hours or 50 hours straight. But she came in because at night she would be waking up and she'd have a couple bowl of Cheerios, and then sometimes she'd have a cigarette so that she would stop having Cheerios. And she was like, I need to work on my cereal parts, and I'm like, a part of me, I'm like, okay, no, we can, but I guess I'm also curious too, like, is the stuff on the weekend, do you have any, Cece? Those are my friends and I need them. Leave that alone. So, okay, learn from your client. I said, okay, we're starting with Cheerios, right? And of course, in IFS, we know that behind every protector, whether it's Cheerios or whatever, we're going to be able to get to the tenderness, to the exiles. So we know we will have access to them wherever we start. But if I were to instead say, I'm sorry, but I can't work with a cereal thing when you're using like this on the weekends, I don't think you understand what's really going, if I were to take that kind of position with that person, what would they do? If they hung around, they'd feel shamed, and probably they wouldn't hang around very long. So I think we have these ways in IFS to work with our own parts and to look at the system with a more welcoming, accepting eye,
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm sitting here with this question. Through your experience and the years of your teaching and just your offering, has your teaching changed over the years for you? And if so, what has been the most significant change?
Oh, that's a good question, Lorani. And you know what? No one's ever asked me that yet. This is good. So let me think about it. Good job. How has my teaching changed? Wow, that is really good. I think the process of getting more clear about what and being able to teach, it with more explicit, clear ideas about how I'm thinking about and how we can work together with the addictive process. I think I've become more clear on that over time. I think I talk faster than I used to because I think I have more to say. I always have to slow down now. I'm getting, as you guys know, I have to be reminded to slow down. What else? I guess, I guess really truthfully, I don't think, someone else could maybe answer it better than me. I don't think I've changed a lot as like in my training role, like as a teacher in that way, Ronnie. I mean, I don't think, I think I've been sort of the same all the way along. I think probably I'm more, like the therapist story, being with therapists in a training environment for a long time, we hear our stories. I think the idea of looking at our history and our story hits me very powerfully. The life of the therapist, our stories and what they are. I think that's hits me very powerfully as an important journey for us to make, and an important aspect of the clinical work. Like we talk about therapist parts at the end of the training, and sometimes I thought, we probably should talk about them in the beginning. I mean, we do in a way in IFS, but I think probably just a respect and almost a wonder and an appreciation of how we happen to get into this line of work. And inviting everyone really to appreciate that within ourselves and maybe know that within ourselves, deepen into that knowledge for ourselves, or what keeps us here, what we're receiving from the work. I think that's become more and more interesting to me. What do we receive from this work? I think that's, does that make sense? I think that's probably what's become big and loomed larger in my thinking.
Yeah, and it's coming back to what you said about, one of the most important teaching you received throughout your work is the humanity behind the person, and coming back in full circle is the human that is the therapist. You understand the human that is the therapist.
Yeah, right. Because we are supposed to be, our needs are behind the scenes when we're doing this work, of course, as they should be. But what we do need some time for that, and and to deepen into that, I think is a lot comes out of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly for me, the journey's never over.
Yeah. So, but this journey here, so we're just going to start to wind down, Cece, and it's been such a wonderful journey. But just one the last few questions. What's one question you wish we, Ollie and I, have asked you, and we haven't, and how would you like to answer that?
Oh goodness. Okay, you could ask, have you always been thought this way about, addictive process and addiction? And I could say no. In the beginning, I worried about alcohol, and I worried about my clients, and I thought I'd better send them to 12-step, and and I didn't know, and I gave people plenty of advice, and so I think that I've just kind of wondered about this issue, and I've had many different kinds of clients, but had my own fears if someone was really strung out, and how can I help them, and was I helping them enough? So I don't think and I didn't know IFS either, but I mean, I think early in my career, I was you know, I had more traditional understanding of, you know, alcohol, drug use. We did lots and lots of work with eating disorders earlier in my career as well. But again, I will say family systems was always looking at how the symptoms were adaptive to the system. So if the person had a symptom because they were trying to adapt to something in the family system. So there was always that sort of sense of the positive behind, that leading the underneath the negative, if you will. But to get clear about all of that, I've been through lots of different places about all of that until I got a little more settled. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, that does. Thanks, Cece. Yeah, I'm glad you named that question. And I think many people listening, and I can definitely relate to that shift. And I've made that shift because of hearing you, and being on the training with you, and reading your book. And I think it's such a wonderful shift to make from that kind of more traditional way of thinking around addictions to this more open-hearted, compassionate understanding that it's adaptive, that it's linked to what's happened to the person in the past. Yeah, it's a really important paradigm to move into, I think, to really be with people in a more healing way, and so that they can have compassion for all the different parts of them, the managers, the firefighters, the whole triangle. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if people want to get in touch with you, Cece, how would you like them to connect with you? You know, they can buy your book. Is that available online? Yeah.
The book's available online, Amazon and other booksellers. You can go to my website to see. I've had a lot of podcasts this year, in like the last few years. They've sped up a little bit. So you can go and listen to some podcasts, and the links are all on my website. You can go to my website to hear those and to find out if I'm doing any workshops or whatever. That's all on there. I try to keep that updated now. I never used to really pay attention. But podcasts are a nice way to listen to things. As you guys know, you provide such a beautiful service to people. It's so fun to be in a dialogue. That dialogue is so much more fun than a teaching in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we have to do our teaching, but it's really fun to talk with you guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed it, Cece. And yeah, thank you so much for giving us your time, and for sharing, your experience and your journeys and your teachings with us. Yeah, I really think you're making a really big contribution to definitely in the IFS community, but also, in the wider addiction field. And really thank you for that. And I hope this lands for a lot of other people, and they start to explore your work, because it's really important. And so, thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Cece. I mean, I have followed your work for so many years, and just really value you and your contribution to this field. But I really thoroughly enjoy just having this conversation with you, because knowing a glimpse of you as a person, the person who's the teacher, the person who's the trainer. So it was a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Cece. Yeah, and it sounds like there's a few other conversations we could possibly have in the future.
All right.
Okay. Take care, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording, and then we can do a little checkout.